Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. If you're the kind of person who just loves to, break down complex topics and get straight to the core of how things actually work, well, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we've got a very specific goal. We are going to completely demystify cerebral palsy. And we're going to do this by literally deconstructing the name itself. By doing that, we'll build a crystal clear understanding of the everyday reality of this condition. So let's get right to it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Why do they actually call it cerebral palsy? I mean, it's a term most of us have heard, maybe in passing, or maybe you even know someone living with it. But how often do we actually stop and ask why those two specific words were put together? Medical terminology can feel super intimidating. Honestly, sometimes it feels like a foreign language intentionally designed to keep the rest of us out, right? But in reality, these terms are meticulously chosen to describe exactly what is happening inside the human body. When we're dealing with medical conditions, the name is rarely random. It acts as a literal blueprint. So to truly grasp what this condition is, and honestly, just as importantly, what it isn't, we need to separate those two words and examine the foundation they're built upon.
Let's start with the first half of our blueprint, cerebral. Simply put, cerebral means relating to the brain. But in this specific context, it points us to a highly targeted issue, damage or abnormal development in the exact areas of the brain that control motor function. Now, what's incredibly important to understand here is the timeline. This abnormal brain development or damage, it typically occurs before birth, during childbirth, or very shortly after. We're talking about a timeline when the human brain is at its absolute most vulnerable. So how does this happen? Well, sometimes it's the result of a severe lack of oxygen during a really complicated delivery. Other times it might be an infection, like encephalitis, that reaches the infant's brain. Or it could even be the result of severe complications stemming from premature birth. Whatever the specific catalyst is, the end result is that the body's command center sustains an injury before it even has a chance to fully mature. The root of the issue is squarely and permanently locked in the brain.
Let's move on and see how this builds. Now that we've got the brain component down, we look at the physical result, which is the palsy part. Palsy basically refers to weakness, paralysis, or just a severe loss of muscle control. Because that specific motor function area of the brain we just talked about is damaged, the resulting effect is an inability to properly command the muscles. And this manifests as profound difficulties with movement, overall balance, and posture. In the real world, this often first presents itself when an infant starts missing those key developmental milestones. A parent might notice their baby isn't rolling over when they should be, or perhaps the baby feels unusually floppy or, conversely, extremely stiff when picked up. You see, the brain is desperately trying to send a signal to the limbs to move, but because the wiring in the motor cortex is essentially frayed, the transmission gets heavily disrupted.
So when we put those two concepts together, we get our defining equation. Cerebral palsy literally translates to brain-related muscle weakness or a lack of control. It perfectly and accurately describes a condition where an issue in the brain directly manifests as a physical movement problem in the body. And honestly, that's the aha moment for so many people when they're first learning about this. It is fundamentally a group of neurological disorders affecting movement, balance, and posture, rather than a disease of the muscles themselves. Actually, think about it like this. The muscles, in a vacuum, they're entirely fine. It's the neurological signals telling those muscles what to do that are the problem. By simply breaking down the name, we've bypassed all that confusing medical jargon to reveal a definition that was actually hidden in plain sight all along.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the fascinating nuance to how this condition behaves as time goes on. First off, it's definitely worth noting that it is the most common motor disability in childhood. But the absolutely critical piece of information to grasp here is that it is a non-progressive condition. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means the physical damage to the brain, that original injury or abnormal development from infancy, it doesn't grow, it doesn't spread, and it doesn't inherently worsen over time. The brain injury itself is entirely static. However, and this is a massive distinction, the physical effects of that static brain injury can, and usually do, change over time. Just think about a child's body for a second. As a kid grows, gains weight, and their bones physically lengthen, the way that muscle weakness or stiffness affects their body can shift dramatically. So, a tight muscle in a toddler might become a severely contracted muscle in a teenager simply because the bone grew while the muscle stayed stiff. So while the brain damage isn't progressing, the body's physical experience of that damage is constantly evolving.
Because the root cause is neurological, the impact, well, it often ripples out way beyond just muscle control. Our brains are these densely packed, incredibly complex webs, right? The motor cortex doesn't just exist in total isolation. If the damage occurs in areas directly adjacent to the motor control centers, individuals might experience a sort of neurological spillover effect. While the primary physical markers are things like muscle stiffness, involuntary movements, and developmental delays, this spillover can result in several associated issues.
It can impact the processing centers for vision, hearing, and even speech. It can alter physical sensation or result in intellectual disabilities. And it's so vital to understand this distinction. While CP is fundamentally a motor disability, its localized nature within the brain means we must always be comprehensively supportive of these other sensory and intellectual areas too, because they frequently take on collateral damage.
And this brilliantly illustrates how brain injuries are honestly as unique as fingerprints. The physical reality of cerebral palsy exists on an incredibly wide spectrum. It is definitely not a one-size-fits-all condition. Based on exactly where the brain was affected, the condition is categorized into 4 distinct types. For one person, it might present as spastic, meaning their muscles are constantly tight and stiff, making a seemingly simple movement, like reaching for a cup, incredibly arduous. For someone else, it might be dyskinetic, which results in unpredictable, uncontrollable, and often writhing movements. Then there's ataxic, which primarily disrupts balance and depth perception, often causing a noticeable tremor when someone tries to walk or perform a really delicate task. And finally mixed, which is, well, exactly what it sounds like, a combination of those previous types. This spectrum is just a powerful reminder of how uniquely the human brain governs the body and how widely the daily experiences of those living with CP can vary.
So, while there currently isn't a cure for the initial brain damage that causes cerebral palsy, early intervention is absolutely paramount. It's a real game changer. When therapies are introduced early, they literally help rewire the brain's pathways and can drastically improve a person's quality of life and independence. The step-by-step approach is super multifaceted. Step 1 relies heavily on physical therapy, stretching tight limbs, strengthening core muscles, and sometimes literally retraining the body how to walk. Step 2 involves medications. For instance, localized Botox injections are frequently used to relax severely contracted muscles, along with oral muscle relaxants. Step 3 utilizes assistive devices. This can range from a simple custom leg brace to improve a walking stride, all the way up to highly advanced speech-generating tablets for folks whose vocal muscles are impacted. And Step 4 is surgery, which is sometimes used to physically lengthen tight tendons or correct anatomical abnormalities, just so a child can simply place their heel flat on the ground. The ultimate goal of all these treatments? It's to dramatically empower independence.
Ultimately, deconstructing the name brings us right back to why this all matters so much. Understanding the true meaning, really grasping the reality of brain-related muscle weakness, is the absolute first step toward providing better, more empathetic support. When we strip away the confusion of that medical jargon, we can focus our energy on what truly makes a difference, funding ongoing research, refining effective therapies, and fostering total independence for every single individual. I want to leave you with a thought to reflect on today. Based on everything we've just covered, how does shifting our societal mindset away from simply finding a cure and instead focusing deeply on maximizing quality of life and independence through intervention change the way we actually support those living with cerebral palsy right now? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating and vital topic. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.